Intro 35 seconds. What happens when a helpless, hungry alien mother, desperate and starving, leaves her baby at a complete stranger's door in the middle of a deadly snowstorm? This alien baby story is breaking the internet right now, and it's about to become the most heartwarming alien story you've ever heard. But here's what nobody expected. The human who found them didn't just take the baby inside. He made a choice that would change 3 lives forever. On the frozen colony planet Nevada 13 in the year 2157, former war medic Marcus Chen faced an impossible decision that night. With government alien hunters patrolling the streets and a society that had turned its back on alien refugees, this moment of human kindness toward an alien family would spark something incredible. This isn't just another sci-fi emotional story about alien refugee survival. This is the true meaning of interspecies compassion, proving that sometimes the most powerful human-alien friendship begins with a single act of courage. What Marcus did next will restore your faith in humanity, and by the end of this alien family rescue story, you'll understand why this alien adoption story is inspiring a movement across the galaxy. The alien mother-baby bond you're about to witness will leave you speechless. The wind howled through the empty streets of Nevada 13, carrying with it the sharp bite of winter that cut through even the thickest thermal gear. Snow whipped across the barren mining colony in frenzied gusts, swirling beneath the pale glow of the streetlights that lined the settlement's outer districts. This was the kind of night where even the most desperate souls sought shelter, where the world outside fell silent under the suffocating weight of the storm. Some nights change everything. This was one of those nights. Marcus Chen had never been a fan of winter on this frozen rock they called home. The cold crept into his bones no matter how many layers he wore, and nights like this only reminded him of how empty his prefabricated housing unit had become over the years since the Great Valari War ended 5 years ago. He stood in his kitchen, a sparse room that held only the essentials, waiting for the food synthesizer to finish heating his evening ration. His weathered hand rubbed over the stubble on his jaw as he listened to the wind battering against the reinforced windows, each gust a reminder of the hostile world beyond these walls. The colony of Nevada 13 had always been a harsh place to live, carved out of necessity rather than choice, when the mining consortium discovered rare mineral deposits beneath the planet's frozen surface. But after the war, after the treaties were signed, and the Valari refugees began their desperate exodus across human-controlled space, it had become something else entirely. The mining operations continued, but now the colony served as a way station for those fleeing the destruction of their homeworld, though few humans welcomed them with open arms. Marcus had seen them occasionally, the tall blue-skinned Valari with their golden eyes huddled in the refugee processing centers or begging for work in the industrial districts. Most humans crossed the street to avoid them. Marcus Chen was 42 years old and had spent the last 5 years perfecting the art of being alone. As a former war medic, he'd seen enough suffering during the conflict to last several lifetimes. He'd lost his wife Zara and their daughter Emma in a Valari orbital bombardment of Earth's lunar colonies early in the war, and when the fighting finally ended, he'd chosen isolation over the painful process of rebuilding connections. His daily routine was precise and unvarying. Wake at 0600 review colony medical reports, perform his duties as the settlement's emergency medical technician, return home, eat synthetic food, and sleep. Contact with other humans remained minimal and professional. The war had taught him that caring too much led to devastating loss. Then came 3 sharp knocks at his door. Marcus frowned, setting down his meal container on the small metal table that served as his dining area. No one came knocking at this hour, especially not in the residential sector where former military personnel were housed. His neighbors weren't exactly the social type, and he had no friends who might visit unannounced. For a moment, he considered ignoring the sound entirely. The storm outside was getting worse, and whoever was out there was probably seeking shelter from someone more willing to provide it. But something about the way the knocking echoed through his unit hollow, urgent, desperate, made his trained medic instincts tighten with concern. Reluctantly, he made his way to the front entrance, his bare feet silent on the cold metal flooring. The security monitor showed only swirling snow and darkness, the storm having knocked out several of the exterior lighting arrays. Marcus hesitated with his hand on the door controls, weighing his options. Opening that door meant complications, and complications were something he'd spent 5 years carefully avoiding. But the knocking came again, weaker this time, and something deep in his chest, something he'd thought the war had killed, stirred with reluctant compassion. He pulled the door open, and the world seemed to stop. At first, his mind couldn't process what he was looking at. The snow had piled high on his doorstep, and nestled within it was a small bundle of fabric that moved with the unmistakable rhythm of life. Something shifted inside the makeshift blankets, something fragile and precious, and then golden eyes fluttered open, locking onto his with a quiet, pleading whimper that cut straight through his carefully constructed emotional defenses. A baby, but not human. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as he took in the tiny, delicate form curled within the protective layers. The infant's skin was a deep, dusky blue that seemed to glow with an inner luminescence under the harsh light spilling from his doorway. Small fingers, tipped with the barest suggestion of claws, grasped weakly at the fabric that surrounded her. This was what the galaxy now called an alien baby story, though Marcus had never expected to find himself at the center of one. The child couldn't have been more than a few months old, and she was slowly freezing to death on his doorstep. His gaze lifted from the bundle, and for the first time he noticed the figure standing just beyond his small porch, half hidden in the swirling curtain of snow. She was tall, easily matching his own 6-foot frame, even as she hunched forward in exhaustion. Her long, black hair clung to her face heavy with melted snow, and her striking features, so different from human ones yet somehow familiar in their expression of desperate hope, were lined with something far deeper than just cold. Hunger carved sharp angles in her cheeks, and her golden eyes held the hollow look of someone who had been turned away too many times to count. She was Valari, one of the alien refugees who had been scattered across human space like seeds on barren ground when their homeworld burned. This hungry alien mother had been wandering through the storm, Marcus realized with growing horror. She had been going door to door carrying her child through the lethal cold, begging for the basic mercy that most humans seemed incapable of providing. How many houses had she visited? How many times had doors been slammed in her face? The questions hit him like physical blows as he watched her golden eyes flicker between his face and the baby in his arms, hope and despair warring in her expression with heartbreaking transparency. The baby let out another soft cry, a sound that seemed to pierce the storm itself, and Marcus's eyes snapped back down to the bundle in the snow. His medical training kicked in automatically, recognizing the signs of hypothermia and malnourishment, even as his heart clenched at the sight. She had been out here too long. They both had. His stomach twisted as he imagined the journey that had brought them to his door. The desperate mother carrying her child through the frozen streets of Nevada, searching for someone, anyone who might show them the human kindness that seemed so rare in these post-war years. The smart thing would have been to direct them to the refugee center to let the proper authorities handle this alien refugee survival situation. The smart thing would have been to close the door and pretend he'd never seen them to let someone else deal with the complications that helping them would inevitably bring. But as Marcus looked down at the baby, at Kira, though he didn't know her name yet, something fundamental shifted inside his chest. The carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart developed their first cracks in 5 years. Before he could second-guess himself, before his rational mind could override the impulse, Marcus bent down and scooped the baby into his arms. She was so light, far too light for a healthy infant, and the moment he held her close, she stilled, as if instinctively recognizing warmth and safety. Her tiny fingers curled against his chest, and for the first time in years, Marcus Chen felt the stirring of something that might have been hope. When he looked up, the Valari mother was still standing there in the storm. She hadn't moved, hadn't tried to follow him inside, and Marcus could see the resignation in her posture. She expected him to take her child and leave her to freeze in the storm outside. She had been refused so many times that she would accept even this partial salvation, the sacrifice of herself, if it meant her baby might survive. The sight of such selfless maternal love, such quiet dignity in the face of rejection, broke something inside Marcus that he'd thought was already beyond repair. "Jesus Christ," he muttered under his breath, running his free hand through his graying hair. Then, louder, his voice carrying over the howling wind, "Get in here, both of you." The woman, Zara, though he wouldn't learn her name for several more minutes, flinched as if his words were a physical blow. For a long moment she didn't move, and Marcus could see the disbelief in her golden eyes, the fear that this was some kind of cruel joke. She had learned not to trust human kindness, had been taught by bitter experience that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. But then she saw the way he was holding her child, saw the genuine concern in his weathered features, and something in her expression shifted like ice cracking under spring warmth. With slow, cautious steps, she crossed the threshold into Marcus's home, bringing with her the scent of snow and desperation, and something else, something that might have been the first fragile beginnings of what would become an extraordinary human-alien friendship. Marcus sealed the door behind her, shutting out the storm and the hostile world beyond, creating a small bubble of warmth and safety in the middle of the frozen colony. She stood just inside his doorway, dripping melted snow onto the metal flooring, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she were trying to hold her very soul together. Now that she was inside, Marcus could see just how dire her condition truly was. Her face was gaunt, her cheeks hollowed by weeks of hunger, and the deep blue of her skin, which should have been rich and vibrant, had faded to something pale and dull. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, like she'd been carrying the weight of survival for far too long without any help or hope of relief. The baby made a soft noise against his chest, and Marcus instinctively adjusted his grip, his medic training automatically cataloging her condition even as his heart broke at her fragility. This wasn't just any alien baby story. This was a tale of survival against impossible odds, of a mother's love transcending species boundaries, of the kind of human kindness that could still exist even in a universe scarred by war and prejudice. As he looked down at the tiny Valari infant in his arms, then up at her mother standing uncertain in his hallway, Marcus Chen realized that his carefully ordered solitary life was about to change forever. What had started as 3 sharp knocks in a storm was becoming something much larger, an alien family rescue that would challenge everything he thought he knew about loyalty, love, and what it truly meant to be human. The alien mother-baby bond he was witnessing in these first precious moments would prove to be just the beginning of a heartwarming alien story that would reshape not just their lives but the very fabric of interspecies compassion on Nevada 13. Sometimes, the most profound acts of courage begin with the simplest choice to open a door when someone knocks. They would stay one night or so, he thought. The sharp rap of knuckles against reinforced polymer echoed through Marcus Chen's housing unit like gunshots in the morning quiet. He froze in the middle of checking Kira's temperature, his medic instincts immediately recognizing the distinctive pattern. 2 quick knocks, pause, 3 more pause, then a final, single knock. Government compliance officers. The sound that had awakened fear in every refugee and refugee helper across Nevada 13 settlements. Zara's golden eyes went wide with terror, her maternal instincts immediately shifting into survival mode as she clutched Kira closer to her chest. The baby, still recovering from her fever, seemed to sense the sudden tension and began to whimper softly. What had been a quiet morning of unexpected domesticity, this heartwarming alien story unfolding in real time, was about to become a test of everything Marcus thought he understood about courage, loyalty, and the cost of human kindness toward those society had deemed unworthy of protection. "Back room," Marcus whispered urgently, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own heartbeat. Storage closet behind the sleeping area. There's a panel that slides. You can fit if you stay low. This wasn't just another routine check. Marcus had been through enough compliance sweeps to recognize the difference between standard documentation reviews and targeted searches. The timing, the specific knock pattern, the fact that they'd come directly to his unit rather than working systematically through the residential block. Someone had reported something. Someone in the colony had seen or suspected enough to trigger a focused investigation into this particular address. As Zara hurried toward the back of his small living space, Marcus forced himself to take slow, steady breaths. His war-trained mind automatically cataloged the evidence of their presence. The extra cup in the sink, the makeshift bed he'd assembled on the couch, the faint but unmistakable scent of Valari pheromones that lingered in the recycled air. Any experienced compliance officer would spot the signs within minutes of entering the unit. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, and Marcus heard a voice through the door's communication panel. Nevada 13 Colony Compliance. Open for routine inspection. Marcus activated the door's security monitor, studying the two figures waiting outside. The older officer was someone he recognized. Agent Torres, a man whose reputation for ruthless efficiency in hunting down undocumented aliens was well known throughout the colony. Torres had the lean, weathered look of someone who'd seen action during the war and carried those hard-won skills into civilian law enforcement. His younger partner, Agent Kim, appeared less certain, her posture suggesting someone still adjusting to the moral complexities of their work. "Just a moment," Marcus called out, buying precious seconds for Zara and Kira to reach their hiding place. He could hear the soft sounds of movement from the back room, the whispered Valari words that were probably prayers or lullabies meant to keep the baby calm. The alien mother-baby bond that had already proven so powerful was now their only hope of avoiding detection. Marcus opened the door with the practiced casualness of someone who had nothing to hide, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Morning, officers. What can I do for you?" Agent Torres stepped forward, his dark eyes already scanning the visible portions of Marcus's living space with professional thoroughness. "Routine compliance check, Mr. Chen. We've had reports of suspicious activity in this residential sector. Unauthorized individuals, unusual sounds at night, that sort of thing." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, though he kept his expression neutral. Reports from neighbors meant that someone had seen Zara, and Kira had noticed the lights burning late in his unit, had heard the sounds of conversation and infant care that were completely foreign to his usual solitary existence. In a colony where anti-alien sentiment ran high, and reporting suspicious activity was considered civic duty, even the smallest deviation from normal behavior could trigger investigations. "Can't say I've noticed anything unusual," Marcus replied evenly, stepping aside to allow the officer's entry. "But then I keep to myself mostly. War habit." Agent Kim glanced at him with something that might have been sympathy. "Medical Corps, right? We have your service record on file. Lunar bombardment survivor medical discharge with honors." Marcus nodded, recognizing the subtext. His military service bought him a certain level of respect and credibility that most civilians didn't enjoy. It also meant the officers would be less likely to push too hard without solid evidence. But that protection only extended so far, and harboring undocumented aliens was a serious offense that could override any consideration for his war service. "Mind if we take a look around?" Torres asked, though it wasn't really a question. Standard procedure. As the officers began their inspection, Marcus felt the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. Helping Zara and Kira had seemed like simple human decency at the time, a hungry alien mother and her child needing shelter from a storm. But now he realized he'd stepped into something much larger and more dangerous. This wasn't just an alien family rescue anymore. It was a confrontation with the systematic machinery of oppression that had made such rescues necessary in the first place. The storage closet where Zara and Kira were hiding was well concealed but not invisible to a thorough search. Marcus watched Agent Torres move methodically through the small, living space, opening cabinets, checking corners, his trained eye cataloging every detail. The man's technique was professional and efficient. He'd clearly done this many times before, turning the search for hidden aliens into a routine that stripped away the humanity of the people he was hunting. "You live alone, Mr. Chen?" Torres asked, pausing near the kitchen area where Marcus had hastily hidden the evidence of multiple occupants. 5 years now, Marcus replied, which was technically true, since the war ended. Agent Kim was examining the small bathroom, her movements less confident than her partner's. Marcus studied her face, trying to read the emotions playing across her features. She was younger than Torres, probably mid-20s, and something about her expression suggested she was still wrestling with the moral implications of their work. There was a tension in her posture that spoke of internal conflict, the look of someone who'd taken this job believing in its necessity but was beginning to question its methods. "A lot of food for one person," Torres observed, opening the small refrigeration unit. "Synthetic proteins, infant nutrition supplements." His voice carried a sharp edge of suspicion as he turned to face Marcus directly. "You expecting company?" Marcus's mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation that wouldn't trigger further investigation. "Medical emergency supplies," he said finally. "Part of my colony health services contract. Sometimes I have to treat patients who can't make it to the main medical facility." It was a thin excuse, but it had the advantage of being partially true. Marcus did maintain emergency medical supplies for his work with the colony's health services, and treating patients in his home wasn't unheard of in emergency situations. But Torres didn't look convinced, and Marcus could see the agent's suspicion deepening. From the back room came the faintest sound, a soft coo that could have been interpreted as the building's ventilation system, but which Marcus recognized as Kira's voice. The baby was stirring, possibly responding to the tension she could sense from her mother. If she began crying, if Zara couldn't keep her quiet, their careful concealment would collapse in an instant, and this heartwarming alien story would become a tragedy of separation and deportation. Agent Kim had moved to the sleeping area, her inspection bringing her dangerously close to the hidden storage compartment. Marcus watched her pause, head tilted slightly, as if she'd heard something, and his blood turned to ice in his veins. Time seemed to slow as she reached for the panel that concealed Zara and Kira, her fingers tracing the edge of the sliding door. "Find something interesting, Kim," Torres called from the main room, his attention momentarily diverted by something he'd discovered. "Maybe," Kim replied, her voice uncertain. "There's something odd about this storage configuration." Marcus knew he had seconds before discovery. His war-trained mind automatically began calculating options: physical confrontation, attempted distraction, outright confession. But none offered any real hope of success. 2 armed agents against 1 unarmed civilian meant that violence would only guarantee a worse outcome for everyone involved. But watching Kim's hand move toward the panel that hid Zara and Kira, Marcus felt something fundamental crystallize in his chest. This wasn't just about avoiding arrest anymore. This was about the kind of person he chose to be in a moment when everything he claimed to believe about compassion and human dignity was being tested. The alien refugee survival story playing out in his home was forcing him to confront the gap between his stated values and his willingness to act on them when the cost became real. "Agent Kim," Marcus said quietly, stepping closer to her. "Before you open that panel, I want you to think about something." She paused, her hand hovering over the storage compartment, golden eyes meeting his with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "What's that, Mr. Chen?" "I want you to think about why you joined the compliance force." Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "Was it to hunt down desperate mothers and their children, or was it because you believed in protecting people?" Torres had moved closer, his hand resting casually on his sidearm, but Marcus could see that Kim was wavering. Something in her expression suggested that his words had struck a nerve, touching on doubts she'd been carrying about the nature of their work. "Step away from the storage area, Mr. Chen," Torres commanded, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Kim, complete your inspection." But Agent Kim didn't move. Instead, she looked at Marcus with an expression that was equal parts challenge and plea. "If there's something in there that I should know about, now would be the time to tell me." The moment stretched between them, heavy with implications that extended far beyond this single interaction. Marcus realized that Kim was offering him a choice: confess and face the consequences, or maintain the deception and force her to discover the truth herself. Either way, the outcome would likely be the same, but the path to that outcome would define who each of them chose to be in this crucial moment. From behind the panel came another soft sound, unmistakably the voice of a baby beginning to wake. Marcus saw Kim's eyes widen with recognition, saw Torres's hand tighten on his weapon, saw the moment when all pretense collapsed and the truth became unavoidable. But before anyone could move, before the panel could be opened and the hiding place revealed, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. "There's nothing in that storage compartment that poses a threat to anyone," he said firmly. "And I'm asking you as one human being to another to consider whether the work you're doing here is really making the galaxy a better place." The silence that followed his words was deafening. Agent Kim stood frozen, her hand still hovering over the panel while Torres watched the scene unfold, with the practiced patience of someone who'd seen this kind of confrontation before. But there was something in Kim's expression, a flicker of uncertainty, a moment of genuine moral questioning, that suggested Marcus's words had found their target. What happened next would determine not just the fate of Zara and Kira, but the trajectory of this unlikely human-alien friendship that had begun with 3 knocks in a storm. The sci-fi emotional story that had started as a simple act of compassion was about to become something much larger, a test of whether interspecies compassion could survive in a system designed to make such compassion impossible. As Agent Kim's hand finally moved toward the panel, Marcus held his breath and prepared to discover whether the humanity he'd glimpsed in her eyes was strong enough to overcome the authority she represented. The alien adoption story that had begun with hope was about to face its greatest challenge, and the outcome would reshape everything they thought they knew about courage, loyalty, and the true meaning of home. The panel slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the small space where a desperate mother and her hybrid child had hidden, hoping that the kindness of strangers might be enough to save them from a galaxy that seemed determined to tear families apart. What Agent Kim saw in that moment would determine whether this remarkable tale of human kindness toward aliens would continue, or whether it would end with the sound of compliance officers reading deportation orders to a woman whose only crime was believing that love could transcend the boundaries of species and citizenship. Time seemed suspended as 3 humans and 2 Velari faced a future that none of them could predict, but all of them would have to live with. The next few seconds would determine whether Marcus Chen's act of compassion would be remembered as a moment of triumph or tragedy, and whether the alien mother-baby bond that had brought them all together would survive the harsh reality of a galaxy still learning to see beyond the differences that divided them. Sometimes, running is the bravest thing you can do, but as Marcus Chen gathered supplies in the pre-dawn darkness of Nevada 13, he wondered if he was being brave or simply foolish. The compliance officers had left 3 hours ago, but their presence had changed everything. Agent Kim's decision to overlook the hidden storage compartment, a choice that Marcus still couldn't fully understand, had bought them time but not safety. The hungry alien mother and her hybrid child could no longer remain hidden in his housing unit, and the only path forward led into the planet's hostile wilderness. The night air cut through Marcus's thermal gear as he loaded the last of their supplies into the modified cargo sled he'd requisitioned from the colony's medical services. Emergency rations, water purification tablets, medical supplies, and a portable shelter that would have to protect 3 lives against Nevada 13's brutal weather. It wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it was all they had. This alien family rescue had evolved from a simple act of compassion into something that could cost all of them their lives. Zara emerged from the housing unit carrying Kira bundled in multiple layers of insulation, her golden eyes reflecting the pale light of Nevada 13's smaller moon. Despite the fear that had dominated her features since the compliance officer's visit, there was something different in her posture now. A resolute determination that spoke of someone who had finally stopped running toward uncertain sanctuary and started running toward something that might actually be hope. "The safe haven coordinates you mentioned," Marcus said quietly, checking the navigation system on his personal communicator. "How certain are you that it actually exists?" Zara's expression flickered with something that might have been doubt, but she lifted her chin slightly. "My husband received the coordinates from a contact in the underground network before he died. A place called New Eden, hidden in the Badlands beyond the mountain passes. Humans and Valerie living together building something new." Marcus nodded, though privately he wondered if they were risking everything based on rumors and desperate hope. The Nevada 13 Badlands were treacherous enough for experienced wilderness travelers. For a war-scarred medic, a refugee scientist, and an infant, they represented dangers that could kill them long before any government forces caught up. But staying meant certain discovery, and discovery meant separation, deportation, or worse. "Accuse. We'll follow the mining roads for the first 50 kilometers. Marcus explained, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Off-road after that to avoid the checkpoint sensors. The weather system moving in from the north should provide cover, but it's also going to make travel dangerous." As they began their journey into Nevada 13's frozen wilderness, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders like a physical burden. This wasn't just about helping strangers anymore. Somewhere in the space between Kira's fever-breaking and Zara's grateful smile, these 2 refugees had become his family. The human-alien friendship that had formed between him and Zara carried the added dimension of shared responsibility for a child who represented the future of 2 species learning to coexist. The cargo sled moved silently across the frozen ground, its repulsor engines muffled by sound dampeners that Marcus had installed during his years of emergency medical runs. Behind them, the lights of the colony grew smaller, then disappeared entirely, leaving only the vast darkness of Nevada 13's wilderness. The twin moons cast enough light to navigate by, but the approaching storm clouds promised that even this small advantage would soon be gone. 2 hours into their journey, the first real test came in the form of automated sensors along the mining road. Marcus had anticipated this, but the reality of bypassing government surveillance while carrying unregistered aliens brought home the magnitude of what they were attempting. He guided the sled off the established path into terrain that was unmarked on any official maps, following memory and instinct through ice fields that could hide crevasses deep enough to swallow them without trace. "You've done this before." Zara observed, her voice steady despite the dangerous ground they were crossing. "This isn't your first time helping refugees." Marcus glanced at her, surprised by her perceptiveness. "No," he admitted. "There have been others. Not many, but enough to know the routes that aren't monitored." It was the first time he'd acknowledged aloud that his solitary existence had been punctuated by moments of conscience, times when the war medic inside him had overridden the isolated survivor he'd tried to become. Each time he'd told himself it was just medical necessity, just his duty to help those who were injured or dying. But looking at Zara and Kira now, he realized that each of those moments had been practice for this, preparation for the day when he would have to choose between safety and family. The storm arrived with the sudden ferocity that characterized Nevada 13's weather systems. One moment they were traveling under starlight, the next they were engulfed in winds that threatened to overturn the cargo sled. Marcus fought to maintain control as ice crystals whipped around them, reducing visibility to mere meters. This wasn't the gentle snow that had accompanied Zara's arrival at his door. This was the kind of storm that killed the unprepared and buried the evidence until spring. "We need shelter," Marcus called over the howling wind, but even as he said it, he realized how inadequate their portable shelter would be against this level of natural violence. The storm would last for hours, possibly days, and they were already several kilometers from the nearest marked shelter. It was Zara who spotted the solution, a rock formation that provided partial windbreak and enough space to establish a defensive position against the storm. As Marcus secured the cargo sled and began setting up their emergency shelter, he became aware of Zara working alongside him with competence that surprised him. Her movements were precise and efficient, and she anticipated his needs in ways that spoke of experience with emergency situations. "Where did you learn survival skills?" he asked, as they worked together to anchor the shelter against the wind. "Refugee camps," she replied simply. "When your homeworld is destroyed and you're scattered across the galaxy, you learn quickly or you die. The camps taught me that survival isn't just about enduring. It's about maintaining dignity and hope even when everything else is gone." Inside the shelter, with the storm raging outside, Marcus found himself studying Zara and Kira in a new light. This heartwarming alien story he'd been living had layers he was only beginning to understand. Zara wasn't just a desperate mother seeking help. She was a trained scientist, a survivor who had already overcome challenges that would have broken most people. And Kira, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around them, represented something that transcended the immediate danger of their situation. "Her mixed heritage," Marcus said quietly, watching the baby's peaceful face. "That's why the safe haven is so important, isn't it? She won't be fully accepted by either species." Zara's golden eyes reflected the soft light of their shelter's heating element. "Hybrid children are the future," she said. "If humanity and the Valari are to coexist, it will be through children like Kira who carry the best of both worlds. But that future requires places where they can grow up without having to choose between their two halves." Marcus nodded, understanding now that this wasn't just an alien refugee survival story. It was about the next generation, about creating a world where children didn't have to bear the burden of their parents' conflicts. The sci-fi emotional story unfolding around them was ultimately about hope, about the possibility that love and compassion could overcome the artificial barriers that politics and fear had created. The storm raged through the night, but inside their small shelter, something profound was happening. Marcus found himself sharing stories of his lost family of Sarah and Emma, and the life that the war had stolen from him. Zara talked about her husband, Torin, about the research they'd been doing before everything fell apart, about the dreams they'd had for their daughter's future. It was in these quiet moments, with death howling outside their fragile shelter, that the alien mother-baby bond expanded to include Marcus in ways that neither of them had expected. "I understand now why you helped us," Zara said, as dawn approached and the storm began to subside. "You're not just saving us. You're saving the part of yourself that the war tried to destroy." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that the isolation he'd chosen was neither sustainable nor necessary. The human kindness he'd shown to Zara and Kira wasn't just about them. It was about reclaiming his own humanity, about choosing to be the person he'd been before loss, and trauma had convinced him that caring was too dangerous. When the storm finally passed, they emerged to find Nevada 13 transformed. The landscape that had been harsh but navigable was now a maze of ice formations and snowdrifts that would require careful navigation to traverse safely. But more concerning was the sound that reached them through the crystal-clear air, the distinctive whine of government search vehicles closer than they should have been. "They're tracking us." Marcus realized, his military training automatically calculating distances and response times. "The storm should have covered our trail, but they're following some other signature." Zara's face went pale as understanding dawned. "The baby's biosignature," she whispered. "Hybrid physiology produces unique metabolic markers. If they have the right scanning equipment, Marcus felt ice form in his stomach that had nothing to do with Nevada 13's climate. They hadn't just been running from the compliance officers. They'd been leaving a trail that sophisticated tracking equipment could follow. The very thing that made Kira special, her mixed heritage, was also what made her detectable to those who sought to separate their unlikely family. "How long do we have?" he asked, already beginning to pack their equipment. "Minutes," Zara replied, her scientist's mind calculating the implications. "The scanning range is limited, but once they acquire our position, they'll vector in pursuit vehicles." Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of continuing their planned route toward the supposed safe haven, he turned the cargo sled toward a destination he'd hoped never to visit again, the abandoned research facility where he'd served during the final months of the war. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was also the one place on Nevada 13 where he knew they could disappear completely. "Where are we going?" Zara asked, as they began moving across the treacherous terrain at a speed that was barely safe. "Somewhere they won't think to look," Marcus replied grimly, "and somewhere that might teach us both something about the cost of the choices we've made." The sound of pursuit vehicles grew louder behind them, but Marcus pushed the cargo sled harder, drawing on reserves of determination he'd thought were exhausted. This alien adoption story had become a race against time with stakes that extended far beyond their individual survival. If they were caught, it wouldn't just mean the end of their unlikely family. It would mean the end of hope for a future where species boundaries mattered less than the capacity for love and compassion. As they approached the facility that held so many painful memories, Marcus realized that this journey had become more than just an escape. It was a pilgrimage toward understanding, toward the kind of redemption that could only come from choosing to protect what mattered most, even when the cost seemed too high to bear. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Ahead, the past waited to be confronted, and between them a hybrid baby slept peacefully, unaware that her very existence represented the future that 3 adults were willing to die to protect. The interspecies compassion that had brought them together was about to face its greatest test, and the outcome would determine whether love could truly transcend the boundaries that fear and politics had created. We all carry ghosts, but some haunt us more than others. Marcus Chen woke screaming in the abandoned research facility on Nevada 13, his voice echoing through corridors that had witnessed too much death during the Great Valari War. Sweat poured down his face despite the frigid air, and his hands shook with the phantom sensation of blood that no amount of washing had ever been able to cleanse. The nightmare was always the same. Sarah and Emma calling his name as the orbital bombardment turned their lunar habitat into expanding plasma, their voices lost in the roar of destruction that had defined his existence for the past 5 years. But this time something was different. This time, gentle hands touched his shoulders and a voice whispered words in a language he didn't understand but recognized as comfort. Zara knelt beside the makeshift bed where he'd collapsed in exhaustion, her golden eyes filled with a compassion that cut through his trauma like warm light through winter darkness. This hungry alien mother, who had every reason to fear human hands after weeks of rejection and cruelty, was offering solace to the man who had saved her and her child. "The dreams," she said softly, her accent making the words sound like a lullaby. "They come for you often." Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. Around them, the abandoned facility seemed to pulse with memories. Medical bays where he'd tried to save soldiers whose injuries defied all treatment laboratories, where desperate experiments had sought to end a war that consumed entire worlds. Corridors where he'd walked as a young medic, convinced that healing was always possible. Now, 5 years later, he was hiding in the ruins of his own broken idealism with an alien family that represented everything the war had taught him to fear. The research station had been his suggestion for shelter, but returning here was like diving into the deepest parts of his own trauma. Every room held ghosts. Every shadow whispered accusations about the lives he'd failed to save. Yet, in the medical bay, where he'd once fought hopeless battles against death itself, Zara was tending to baby Kira with the same gentle determination that had once driven his own healing efforts. The alien mother-baby bond playing out before him was a reminder that something survived even the worst that the galaxy could inflict. "Tell me about them," Zara said, settling beside him with Kira sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Your wife and daughter. Tell me about who they were before the war took them." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, a wall he'd built to contain 5 years of grief and guilt. No one had asked him about Sarah and Emma in years. Most people knew better than to probe the wounds of war veterans, and he'd perfected the art of deflecting such questions with professional distance. But there was something in Zara's voice, a quality of genuine care, that made deflection impossible. Sarah was a terraforming engineer. He began, his voice rough with disuse. She could look at a dead rock floating in space and see forests, oceans, cities full of life. She used to say that healing planets and healing people were the same skill. You had to believe in the possibility of something better, even when all the evidence suggested it was impossible. Zara listened without interruption, her golden eyes reflecting the soft glow of their portable heater. Outside, Nevada 13's wind howled through the facility's damaged walls, but inside their improvised shelter something warmer was taking root. This wasn't just another alien refugee survival story anymore. It was becoming a tale of shared healing of two broken souls, finding strength in each other's pain. Emma was 6 when she died. Marcus continued, the words coming easier now. She wanted to be a xenobiologist to study all the different forms of life across the galaxy. She used to collect pictures of alien species from the public databases, trying to understand how they lived what they needed to survive. She would have been fascinated by you and Kira. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Emma Chen, who had dreamed of understanding alien life, had been killed in a war between the species she'd wanted to study. And now her father was risking everything to protect the very kind of family she'd hoped to help save. The human-alien friendship developing between Marcus and Zara was built on this foundation of shared loss, a recognition that the war had stolen futures from all of them. "Torin would have liked her," Zara said quietly. "My husband was also curious about other species, other ways of living. He believed that diversity made the galaxy stronger, that each species contributed something unique to the whole. He died believing that humans and Valari could learn from each other, could build something better together." As they talked through the night, sharing memories and grief in equal measure, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what they'd lost. Not just individual lives, but entire possibilities for cooperation and growth. The Great Valari War hadn't just killed billions of people. It had murdered the future that curious children like Emma and idealistic scientists like Torin had envisioned. Yet, here in the ruins of a facility that had contributed to that destruction, a new kind of future was slowly taking shape. Dawn came with the pale light of Nevada 13's twin suns filtering through the damaged walls, and with it came a confession that Marcus had never spoken aloud. "I wasn't just a medic during the war," he said, his voice barely audible over the morning wind. "In the final months, when everything was falling apart, they assigned me to biological weapons research. Project Nightfall. We were developing targeted pathogens that would affect Valari physiology while leaving humans unharmed." Zara went very still, her scientific mind immediately grasping the implications. "Selective biological warfare," she whispered. "We heard rumors, but we never confirmed it actually existed." "It existed," Marcus confirmed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "And I helped create it. I told myself I was saving human lives, that it was just another form of medicine applied to warfare. But I was designing death on a molecular level, and when I finally understood what we'd accomplished..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "What happened?" Zara asked, though her voice suggested she already suspected the answer. "I destroyed it," Marcus said simply. "The entire research program, all the data, the production facilities. I made sure that particular nightmare would never be unleashed on anyone. But in doing so, I also guaranteed that the war would continue, that more people on both sides would die in conventional conflicts." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of moral complexity that had no easy answers. Marcus waited for Zara to pull away to recognize that he was complicit in the very system that had made her a refugee. Instead, she shifted closer, her free hand finding his with a gentleness that nearly broke his composure entirely. "You chose to be human," she said finally. "In a situation designed to make humanity impossible, you chose to remain who you were meant to be. That choice cost you everything. Your career, your safety, probably your peace of mind. But it also saved countless lives, including mine and Kira's. If that weapon had existed during the final offensive, she didn't need to finish." They both understood that selective biological warfare would have transformed an already devastating conflict into genocide. Marcus's choice to destroy his own work had preserved the possibility for this moment. A human and a Valeri, former enemies, sharing grief and hope in equal measure while protecting a child who represented the future both species needed. The heartwarming alien story that had begun with desperation in a snowstorm was revealing layers of moral complexity that neither of them had expected. This wasn't just about human kindness toward aliens. It was about the possibility of redemption, about whether people who had participated in atrocity could still choose to do good when it mattered most. "I see why you helped us," Zara said as the morning light grew stronger. "It wasn't just compassion, it was penance. You're trying to save the future you helped put in jeopardy." Marcus nodded, feeling lighter than he had in years. Speaking the truth aloud, sharing the burden of his choices with someone who could understand their weight, had begun a healing process he'd thought was impossible. The sci-fi emotional story unfolding around them was ultimately about forgiveness. Not the kind granted by others, but the harder variety that had to be earned through years of choosing differently. Kira stirred in her mother's arms, golden eyes opening to regard the world with the serene curiosity of infancy. In her mixed heritage, her human and Valeri features blended into something entirely new. Marcus saw the living embodiment of the future Emma had dreamed of studying. This child would grow up knowing both species as family, carrying the best of each culture while transcending the limitations of either. "She's going to change everything," Marcus said, gently touching one tiny blue-tinted hand. "Children like Kira, they're going to make the war irrelevant." "If we can keep her safe long enough to grow up," Zara replied, but there was hope in her voice now instead of just fear. "If we can find a place where hybrid children can flourish instead of hiding." The sound of distant engines interrupted their conversation, and Marcus felt his blood chill as he recognized the signature of government pursuit vehicles. Their night of healing had been bought with time they didn't have, and now the price was coming due. Through the facility's damaged walls, he could see search patterns in the sky that meant their hunters had finally closed the distance. "They found us," Zara said, her voice steady despite the danger. "What do we do now?" Marcus looked at the woman who had become his anchor to humanity, at the child who represented hope for a better future at the facility where he'd once compromised his principles in service to a war machine that devoured everything it touched. The choice before him was simple in its complexity: surrender and accept separation, or fight for the family he'd chosen when the galaxy seemed determined to tear it apart. "We finish what we started," he said, feeling something settle into place inside his chest that had been missing for 5 years. "We get you and Kira somewhere safe no matter what it costs." The interspecies compassion that had brought them together was about to face its ultimate test. The alien family rescue that had begun with 3 knocks in a storm was approaching its climax, and the outcome would determine whether love could truly transcend the artificial boundaries that politics and fear had created. As the sound of pursuit vehicles grew closer, Marcus Chen prepared to discover whether redemption was possible for those who had lost everything, including themselves. Outside, Nevada 13's harsh dawn revealed the hunters closing in on their prey. Inside, 3 souls who had found each other across the wreckage of war, prepared to defend the most precious thing in the galaxy. The possibility that tomorrow could be different from yesterday, that children like Kira could inherit a world where the sins of their parents didn't define the boundaries of their dreams. The alien adoption story that had started with desperation was about to become a testament to the power of chosen family, and the lengths that people would go to protect what mattered most. We all carry ghosts, but sometimes, if we're lucky, we also carry hope. The canyon walls of Nevada 13's Badlands rose like the ribs of some massive frozen beast, casting shadows that provided both concealment and claustrophobia as Marcus Chen guided their stolen transport through the narrow pass. Behind them, the distinctive whine of government pursuit vehicles echoed off the rock faces, growing closer with each passing minute. This chase sequence had been inevitable from the moment they'd fled the research facility, but now, with the sound of their hunters reverberating through the canyon, the reality of their situation crystallized into stark, terrifying clarity. How much further? Marcus called over the howling wind, his hands steady on the controls despite the adrenaline flooding his system. The transport bucked and shuddered as it navigated the treacherous terrain, its repulsor engines straining against Nevada 13's gravity well and the increasingly violent weather. Zara clutched Kira closer to her chest, her golden eyes scanning the route ahead with the methodical precision of someone whose scientific training had been forged in survival. 3 kilometers to the main pass, she replied, her voice barely audible over the storm. But Marcus, if they corner us in there. She didn't need to finish the thought. The canyon pass was a natural bottleneck, and if Agent Torres and his team caught them before they reached the other side, there would be nowhere to run. The alien family rescue that had sustained them through weeks of danger was approaching its most critical moment, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Behind them, the hungry alien mother who had knocked on Marcus's door in desperation now carried herself with the dignity of someone who had found family worth fighting for. The pursuit vehicles were close enough now that Marcus could make out individual craft through the swirling snow. Agent Torres was leading the formation, his determination to capture them having evolved into something approaching obsession over the past several days. But it was Agent Kim's presence that concerned Marcus most. The young officer who had shown them mercy once before now found herself on the wrong side of an increasingly impossible situation. There, Zara pointed toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. The smuggler's route Maya told us about. If we can reach it before they see us. Marcus banked the transport hard to the right, feeling the craft's structural integrity groan under the stress. The crevice was barely wide enough for their vehicle, and the entrance was partially concealed by ice formations that had built up over Nevada 13's harsh winter. It was a desperate gambit, but their options had narrowed to desperate measures. As they squeezed through the opening, Marcus caught a glimpse of their pursuers' confusion as their quarry seemingly vanished into solid rock. But the advantage would be temporary. Torres was too experienced to be fooled for long, and thermal scanners would eventually reveal their position. The smuggler's route would buy them time, but not safety. The hidden passage wound through Nevada 13's geological formations like a natural labyrinth carved by ancient water flows and expanded over centuries by those who needed to move unseen. Marcus had never traveled this route before, but Maya's directions had been precise, and Zara's scientific understanding of the planet's geology helped them navigate the more treacherous sections. "I need to tell you something," Zara said suddenly, her voice cutting through the engine noise. "About Kira's father." Marcus glanced at her, noting the tension in her posture that had nothing to do with their current danger. "What about him?" "He wasn't just a human researcher." Zara continued, her golden eyes fixed on the path ahead. "He was Agent Torres's brother. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow, the pieces of Torres's obsessive pursuit suddenly falling into place. This wasn't just about enforcing immigration law or capturing alien refugees. This was personal. Torres was chasing the woman who had been involved with his brother, the child who carried his family's DNA, the living reminder of a relationship that had crossed species boundaries during the most violent period in recent galactic history. That explains why he won't give up, Marcus said grimly, understanding now that their pursuit had dimensions beyond simple law enforcement. He's not just hunting refugees, he's hunting his own family. The alien mother-baby bond that had driven Zara to desperate measures was mirrored by Torres's own complicated relationship with his brother's legacy. The heartwarming alien story that had begun with compassion was now entangled with themes of family loyalty, guilt, and the ways that love could transcend or be perverted by prejudice and loss. As they emerged from the smuggler's passage onto a high plateau, the scope of their situation became clear. The storm that had provided cover was beginning to break, and the open ground ahead offered little concealment. Worse, the sound of pursuit vehicles had not diminished. If anything, Torres's team seemed to be gaining ground through some alternate route. "The mountain pass is just ahead," Zara said, pointing toward a gap in the ridgeline. "Maya said there's a checkpoint, but it's usually unmanned during storms." Marcus nodded, pushing the transport harder as they raced across the exposed terrain. Behind them, the first of the pursuit vehicles emerged from the canyon, and he could see muzzle flashes as warning shots were fired in their direction. The time for stealth had passed. Now it was a straight race to reach Sanctuary before they were overwhelmed. Agent Kim's voice crackled over the emergency frequency, her words barely audible through the static. "Marcus Chen, this is Agent Kim. You need to stop now. Torres is authorized to use lethal force." Marcus keyed the transmitter, his response carrying across the wasteland. "Agent Kim, you know what happens to them if we're captured. Is that really what you signed up for?" The silence that followed was broken only by the howl of Nevada 13's wind and the growing sound of pursuit engines. When Kim finally responded, her voice was strained with conflict. "Marcus, I'm trying to help you, but there are limits to what I can do." "Then help us reach the pass," Marcus replied. "That's all we need." The alien refugee survival story playing out across Nevada 13's hostile landscape had become a test of conscience for everyone involved. Agent Kim's growing doubts about her mission reflected the broader moral complexity of a galaxy still learning to navigate the aftermath of interspecies war. The human kindness that had initially motivated Marcus was now being tested by the harsh realities of a system that viewed compassion as a threat to order. As they approached the mountain pass, the terrain became increasingly treacherous. Ice-covered rocks and sudden drop-offs required careful navigation, while the pursuit vehicles behind them were forced to slow their approach. But Marcus could see that Torres was not deterred. If anything, the agent seemed to be positioning his team for a final confrontation at the pass itself. "He's going to try to block the exit," Marcus realized, studying the tactical situation with his military training. "If we get caught in the pass with pursuit behind us and a roadblock ahead, we'll be trapped." Zara finished, her scientific mind immediately grasping the implications. "Is there another way?" Marcus scanned the terrain ahead, looking for alternatives that might not exist. The mountain pass was the only viable route to the valley where New Eden was supposed to be hidden, and Torres knew it. The sci-fi emotional story that had carried them this far was approaching its climax, and the outcome would depend on choices made in the next few minutes. That's when Kira began to cry. The sound was soft at first, just the normal fussing of an infant who had been jostled too much and was hungry for her mother's comfort. But as the transport bucked through another series of rough terrain, her cries grew louder, more insistent. In the confined space of their vehicle, the sound seemed to echo with impossible volume. "She's scared," Zara said, trying to soothe her daughter with gentle whispers and careful movements. "She can sense our fear." Marcus felt his heart clench at the sight of the hybrid child who had become the center of their unlikely family. Kira represented so much more than just a baby caught in a desperate situation. She was the future of interspecies cooperation, the living embodiment of hope in a galaxy that seemed determined to keep humans and Valari apart. The alien adoption story that had transformed his life was now balanced on the edge of tragedy. "The pass is just ahead," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Whatever happens next, we face it together." As they approached the narrow entrance to the mountain pass, Marcus could see Torres's vehicles already in position. The trap was set, and there would be no easy escape. But looking at Zara holding Kira, seeing the determination in the hungry, alien mother's golden eyes, Marcus realized that some things were worth any risk. The alien family rescue that had begun with 3 knocks in a storm was about to face its ultimate test. The interspecies compassion that had brought them together would either triumph over the forces arrayed against them or be destroyed by the same fear and prejudice that had started the Great Valari War 5 years ago. As their transport entered the mountain pass with pursuit vehicles closing in behind them and an uncertain future ahead, Marcus Chen prepared to discover whether love could truly conquer the artificial boundaries that divided the galaxy. The sound of Kira's cries mixed with the howl of Nevada 13's wind, creating a soundtrack for what might be either the end of their journey or the beginning of something entirely new. Behind them, Agent Torres's voice crackled over the radio with the cold authority of someone who believed he was doing the right thing. Ahead, the pass narrowed to a point where a single mistake could end everything they had fought to protect. And in the middle, 3 souls who had found each other across the wreckage of war, prepared to face whatever came next together. The hunters had closed in, but the story was far from over. "We made it. We're home." The words escaped Marcus Chen's lips in a whisper as he stood at the edge of the hidden valley gazing down at what could only be New Eden settlement. After weeks of running, hiding, and fighting for survival across Nevada 13's hostile landscape, the sight before them seemed almost impossible to believe. Nestled in a natural basin protected by towering canyon walls, a thriving community of mixed human and alien architecture spread across terraced levels with gardens and workshops, creating a patchwork of life that defied everything they'd been told about post-war civilization. But it was Agent Torres stepping out from behind a cluster of rocks, weapon drawn and trained directly at Zara, that shattered the moment of hope into fragments of terror and betrayal. The man who had pursued them across half a planet stood silhouetted against the settlement below his face, etched with the kind of obsession that had consumed his life for months. This wasn't the triumphant arrival the alien family rescue story had been building toward. This was a confrontation that had been inevitable from the moment Torres learned his brother's hybrid child was alive. "Hello, Zara," Torres said, his voice carrying a mixture of grief and rage that made Marcus's blood run cold. "I've been waiting a long time to meet the woman who destroyed my family." Zara went very still, clutching Kira closer to her chest as the full scope of their situation became clear. They had reached safety only to discover that safety was an illusion. The hungry alien mother who had knocked on Marcus's door in desperation now faced the brother of the man she had loved, the uncle of the child she was protecting, the embodiment of a family's complicated grief and hatred. "Agent Torres," Marcus said carefully, positioning himself between the weapon and Zara. "Let's talk about this. Whatever you think happened between your brother and Zara, it doesn't justify what?" Torres interrupted his weapon, never wavering. "Justify hunting down the alien who seduced my brother away from his own species, who turned him against his own family, who got him killed." The accusation hung in the air like a physical blow, and Marcus saw something break in Zara's expression. This wasn't just about law enforcement or immigration policy. This was about love loss and the ways that grief could transform into something poisonous when it had nowhere else to go. The heartwarming alien story that had sustained them through their journey was colliding with the harsh reality of human pain and prejudice. "David loved me," Zara said quietly, her voice carrying across the distance between them with surprising strength. And I loved him. What we had wasn't seduction or betrayal. It was hope for a future where our species could find common ground. Torres's laugh was bitter and sharp. Common ground? Is that what you call it when you got him assigned to your research project? When you isolated him from his family, filled his head with ideas about interspecies cooperation? When you got him killed trying to protect your precious hybrid experiments? The words hit Marcus like physical blows as the true scope of the situation became clear. This wasn't just about a love affair between a human and a Valari during wartime. This was about scientific collaboration, about research that had apparently gotten David Torres killed, about a child who represented far more than just mixed heritage. You want to know the truth about your brother's death? Zara asked, her golden eyes blazing with pain and defiance. He died because he discovered what his own government was planning to do with our joint research. He died because he chose to warn us instead of participating in genocide. Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. The biological weapons research he'd destroyed at the end of the war, the targeted pathogens designed to affect Valari physiology. David Torres had been involved in similar work, had learned about the planned deployment, and had apparently chosen conscience over species loyalty. You're lying, Torres said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. David was a patriot. He would never participate in the systematic extermination of an entire species, Zara finished. That's exactly right. Your brother died a hero, Agent Torres. The question is whether you're going to honor his memory or betray everything he believed in. The confrontation had evolved beyond personal grievance into something that spoke to the heart of post-war reconciliation. The alien refugee survival story playing out on the edge of New Eden was really about the choice between perpetuating cycles of violence and hatred or finding the courage to build something better from the ashes of conflict. Agent Kim emerged from concealment behind Torres, her weapon drawn, but not aimed at anyone specific. Her face showed the strain of divided loyalties of someone who had been forced to choose between duty and conscience over the course of their pursuit. Marcus, she called out. Agent Torres received new orders from command. He's authorized to terminate the targets rather than capture them. The revelation sent ice through Marcus's veins. This had escalated beyond deportation or separation. Now they were talking about execution, about silencing witnesses to wartime atrocities that powerful people preferred to keep buried. The sci-fi emotional story of interspecies compassion was about to become a tragedy, unless someone found a way to break the cycle of violence. You don't want to do this, Torres, Marcus said, his medic training helping him maintain calm in the face of imminent violence. Killing them won't bring your brother back. It won't heal your family's pain. It will just create more orphans, more refugees, more reasons for the next generation to continue this war. My brother is dead because of her. Torres shouted, his composure finally cracking. Because she convinced him to betray his own species, because she made him choose them over us. No, said a new voice from the settlement below, and Marcus turned to see a figure climbing the path toward them. The man was elderly, with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command, but it was the recognition in Torres's eyes that made Marcus realize who this was. Hello, Roberto, the older man said gently. It's been a long time. Torres's weapon wavered as he stared at the approaching figure. Uncle Miguel. What are you doing here? How are you here? Elder Thane, Miguel Torres, as Marcus now understood, reached the top of the path and stood calmly between the opposing groups. I'm here because this is where your brother would have wanted me to be, he said simply. I'm here because David died trying to create a future where children like his daughter could grow up without having to choose between their humanity and their heritage. The family connections that had driven Torres's obsession were revealing themselves in layers of complexity that Marcus was only beginning to understand. Miguel Torres had been a war general, had lost his nephew to what he'd thought was enemy action, but had somehow ended up as the leader of a mixed-species settlement that represented everything his military service had supposedly opposed. David's daughter, Torres, whispered, his gaze moving to Kira with new understanding. She's your niece, Miguel confirmed. She carries your family's DNA, your brother's hopes for the future, and her mother's courage in the face of impossible odds. The question is what you're going to do with that knowledge. The alien mother-baby bond that had driven Zara to desperate measures was suddenly mirrored by the human family connections that Torres had been trying to suppress. The alien adoption story that had begun with desperation was revealing itself as something much more complex. A tale of families divided by war, reunited by loss, and facing the choice between perpetuating hatred or embracing healing. Agent Kim lowered her weapon entirely, her decision finally made. Agent Torres, I'm officially declaring this mission compromised. These people aren't threats to security, they're evidence of what's possible when we choose cooperation over conflict. Torres stood frozen, his weapon still trained on Zara, but his entire worldview cracking under the weight of revelations he hadn't been prepared to face. In Kira's hybrid features, he could see his brother's eyes, his family's stubborn determination, the future that David had died trying to protect. He never told me, Torres said finally, his voice broken. David never told me about any of this. About you, about the baby, about what he was really working on. He was protecting you, Zara replied gently. He knew that knowledge of our relationship, of our research, would put you in an impossible position. He died protecting all of us, human and Valeria alike, from weapons that would have made coexistence impossible. The human-alien friendship that had sustained Marcus and Zara through their journey was expanding to encompass even their pursuer, offering the possibility that understanding could triumph over hatred, that family bonds could bridge the artificial divisions that politics had created. I've spent months hating you, Torres whispered, blaming you for his death, hunting you across the galaxy, believing that destroying you would somehow make the loss hurt less. Grief makes us do terrible things, Miguel said softly, but it can also teach us what really matters. Your brother died believing that love was stronger than fear, that the future belonged to people who could see past the boundaries that divided them. His daughter is living proof that he was right. Marcus watched as Torres slowly lowered his weapon, saw the moment when vengeance transformed into something that might eventually become healing. The alien family rescue that had brought them all to this point was revealing its true purpose, not just saving one mother and child, but demonstrating that redemption was possible, even for those who had lost their way in the darkness of war and grief. Down in the valley, New Eden continued its daily life, a testament to the possibility that humans and Valeri could build something together that neither species could create alone. The settlement represented the future that David Torres had died for, that his brother had unknowingly been hunting, and that his daughter would inherit if they could find the courage to lay down their weapons and embrace the possibility of peace. What happens now? Torres asked, looking at his uncle, at Zara, at the child who carried his brother's legacy. Now, Miguel said with a gentle smile, you get to meet your niece properly, and we all get to discover what it means to be family in a galaxy that's still learning how to heal. The human kindness that had started with 3 knocks in a storm had evolved into something larger. The recognition that families come in many forms, that love transcends species boundaries, and that the future belongs to those brave enough to choose hope over hatred. As they began their descent toward New Eden, Marcus realized that their journey was ending where it had always been meant to, not with escape from the past, but with the courage to build something better from its ashes. The interspecies compassion that had sustained them through their darkest moments was about to become the foundation for a new kind of community, where hybrid children could grow up knowing they belonged to both worlds, and neither where former enemies could become family, and where the dream of peace could finally take root in soil that had been watered with too much blood for too long. We made it, Marcus thought again. But more than that, we found home. 6 months later, the sound of Kira's laughter filled the morning air of New Eden like music from another world. Marcus Chen watched from the doorway of their small but comfortable home as his daughter, and she was his daughter now in every way that mattered, took her first tentative steps across the garden path, her golden eyes bright with the pure joy of discovery. At 10 months old, she was already speaking words in both human standard and Valari, her hybrid nature, allowing her to bridge languages as easily as she bridged species. The hungry alien mother who had once stood desperate in a snowstorm now knelt in rich soil, tending to vegetables that would feed families throughout the settlement. Zara had found her place in New Eden as both scientist and teacher, sharing her knowledge of sustainable agriculture while learning from human techniques that had kept colonies alive on hostile worlds. The alien mother-baby bond that had driven her to impossible acts of courage had expanded to encompass an entire community that had embraced them as family. "She's getting faster every day," Agent Kim observed, approaching from the communal area where she'd been conducting her morning briefings. The former compliance officer had become New Eden's official liaison with the outside galaxy, negotiating agreements that protected the settlement while maintaining necessary connections to human space. Her transformation from pursuer to protector represented the kind of personal growth that made their community possible. Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar warmth in his chest that had replaced the hollow ache he'd carried for 5 years. Yesterday, she figured out how to open the storage compartments. Today, she'll probably be dismantling the communication array just to see how it works. The human-alien friendship that had formed between him and Zara had deepened into something that transcended species entirely. They had been married 3 months ago in a ceremony that blended human and Valari traditions, with Elder Thane officiating and Agent Torres, now simply Roberto, standing as Marcus's best man. The transformation of the man who had once hunted them across Nevada 13 into a valued member of their extended family demonstrated the power of forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. A soft chime from the settlement's communication center interrupted Marcus's morning observations. Kim's expression grew serious as she listened to her earpiece, then looked up with concern. "We have visitors," she announced. "Government transport approaching from the north. Official flags and everything." The words sent a chill through the small gathering, but it was different from the paralyzing fear that had once dominated their lives. New Eden had spent the past 6 months preparing for this moment, building legal protections, establishing trade relationships, and documenting their success as an integrated community. The alien refugee survival story that had brought them together had evolved into something larger, a proof of concept for post-war coexistence. Zara rose from her garden soil, still clinging to her hands, but her posture reflected confidence rather than fear. "Let them come," she said quietly. "We have nothing to hide." As the government delegation entered New Eden's main plaza, Marcus was struck by the contrast between their sterile uniforms and the vibrant life surrounding them. Children, human, Valari, and hybrid, played together in the community spaces while adults of both species worked side by side on projects that benefited everyone. The heartwarming alien story that had begun with desperate survival had become a living testament to what was possible when fear was replaced by understanding. The delegation's leader was a woman Marcus didn't recognize, but her bearing suggested high-level authority. She surveyed the settlement with professional thoroughness, her expression neutral, but her eyes taking in every detail of the successful integration she was witnessing. Behind her, a small team of analysts and observers documented what they saw with careful precision. "I am Director Sarah Martinez of the Colonial Integration Council," she announced to the gathered community. "We're here to conduct a formal evaluation of the New Eden settlement and its residents." Elder Thane stepped forward, his natural authority, commanding respect even from the government officials. "Director Martinez, welcome to New Eden. We've been expecting this visit for some time. The evaluation process took most of the day, with officials interviewing residents, reviewing community records, and observing daily operations. Marcus found himself answering questions about medical services, while Zara demonstrated the agricultural innovations that had made their food production sustainable. Even Kira, in her innocent way, contributed to their case by charming the visitors with her bilingual babbling and obvious health and happiness. It was Agent Torres who provided the most powerful testimony. Standing before the delegation, he spoke with quiet conviction about his brother's vision about the family he'd discovered in New Eden, about the future that hybrid children like Kira represented for both species. The sci-fi emotional story of their journey had become his story too, proof that even the most entrenched prejudices could be overcome through direct experience and open hearts. As the sun began to set over New Eden's protected valley, Director Martinez gathered the community for her official statement. The tension was palpable. Months of work, dozens of lives, and the future of interspecies cooperation all hung in the balance of her words. The Colonial Integration Council has completed its evaluation. She began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. We have examined your community structure, your resource management, your conflict resolution procedures, and your success in creating a stable, productive settlement. Marcus felt Zara's hand slip into his, their fingers intertwining as they waited for judgment. Kira dozed peacefully in his other arm, trusting in the safety her parents had created for her. It is the official determination of the Council that New Eden Settlement represents a successful model for post-war integration. Martinez continued, effective immediately, this community is granted full legal recognition as an autonomous settlement under the Colonial Charter, with all the protections and rights that status entails. The cheer that erupted from the crowd was deafening, a mixture of human voices and Valari harmonic expressions of joy that seemed to echo off the canyon walls. The alien family rescue that had begun with 3 knocks in a storm had achieved something no one had dared to hope for: official recognition of their right to exist, to thrive, and to build a future together. But Director Martinez wasn't finished. Furthermore, she said, raising her voice over the celebration, the Council has authorized the establishment of additional integrated settlements based on the New Eden model. We will be seeking experienced volunteers to help establish these communities and share the knowledge you've gained here. The implications were staggering. What had started as desperate alien refugee survival was becoming a movement, a new approach to post-war healing that could spread across human space. The human kindness that had motivated Marcus to open his door on that stormy night was now being validated and encouraged on a galactic scale. As the delegation prepared to depart, Director Martinez approached Marcus and Zara privately. Your story has already begun to spread, she told them. There are people across the galaxy who are inspired by what you've accomplished here. The hungry alien mother who refused to give up the human who chose compassion over fear, the child who represents hope for the future. These aren't just personal victories anymore. They're symbols of what's possible when we choose to see each other as family rather than enemies. That evening, as New Eden celebrated its official recognition, Marcus found himself standing once again at the edge of the settlement, looking out over the valley that had become home. But this time he wasn't alone in his contemplation. Zara stood beside him, Kira babbling contentedly in her arms while the lights of their community twinkled below like stars brought down to earth. Do you ever think about that night? Zara asked softly. About what would have happened if you'd made different choices? Marcus considered the question, remembering the man he'd been 6 months ago, isolated, haunted, convinced that caring led only to loss. I think about the life we almost didn't have, he replied. The family that almost never existed. The future that almost wasn't possible. The interspecies compassion that had brought them together had grown into something that would outlast their individual lives. In communities across the galaxy, humans and Valari would look to New Eden as proof that coexistence wasn't just possible, it was transformative. The alien adoption story that had made them a family had become a template for rebuilding an entire civilization. Kira reached up with tiny fingers to touch Marcus's face, her golden eyes reflecting the light of Nevada 13's twin moons. In her gaze, he saw the future that Emma had dreamed of, studying the world that Sarah had believed was possible, the hope that had survived the worst that war and hatred could inflict. "Family isn't about blood," Marcus said quietly, echoing the words that had become New Eden's unofficial motto. "It's about choice. It's about deciding that love is stronger than fear, that understanding is more powerful than prejudice, that the future belongs to those brave enough to build it together." The alien baby story that had begun with desperate survival had become something magnificent, a testament to the transformative power of human kindness, the unbreakable strength of family bonds, and the endless possibility for redemption and renewal. As they walked back toward their home, toward the community that had embraced them, toward the future, they were building one choice at a time. Marcus Chen understood that some storms don't just bring destruction. Sometimes they bring exactly what we need to find our way home. And that's the power of a single choice. Marcus Chen's decision to open his door that stormy night didn't just save 2 lives. It transformed an entire galaxy's approach to healing and hope. In our own world, we face countless moments where we can choose fear or compassion, isolation or connection, building walls or building bridges. The truth is, every act of human kindness creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see, just like Marcus's 3 simple words, "Get in here, both of you." Welcome to Galactic Sci-Fi Saga, where we explore the extraordinary potential of ordinary human choices. This channel is dedicated to HFY, Humanity F. Yeah. Stories that celebrate what makes us uniquely powerful in the cosmos. Not our weapons or our technology, but our capacity for growth, our willingness to sacrifice for others, and our stubborn refusal to let darkness have the final word. Every saga we share asks the same question. What happens when humans decide to be the heroes the galaxy needs? If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're building a community of people who believe in the power of human potential. The ads you see support our mission to bring you premium sci-fi content completely free. And please share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Have you ever opened your door to someone who needed help? Your stories inspire our stories. To everyone who's listened this far, you're part of something special. We're not just sharing tales about distant worlds. We're celebrating the heroic potential that exists within each of us. Every time you choose kindness over fear, understanding over prejudice, hope over despair, you're writing your own HFY story. The galaxy needs more humans like Marcus Chen, and I have a feeling it's going to find them among the incredible people who've chosen to be part of this community. Until our next adventure among the stars, keep believing in the extraordinary power of ordinary human hearts. This is Galactic Sci-Fi Saga, where humanity takes the lead and the universe is better for it.